Okay, hello. So my name is Christian. I've been working on a lot of state management through the years because I've been working mostly on big, complex single-page applications. And I've had a hard time using the state management primitives coming from UI libraries. Specifically, React has been a big challenge. And then we're seeing like these types of solutions coming up. Like there's this reactive state management coming up, but we also see reactive UIs coming up, and it seems to be like an either or. And I was thinking like, if I were to build a UI library, I would still want my state management to be reactive because I think, at least from my experience, that that's the best possible paradigm to do state management. But what I've also experienced is that a reconciling UI, like a function that's called again and again, and the result is compared, is the best paradigm for expressing UIs. So I thought, how would we kind of put this together if it was a first-class concept in a UI library? So that's what I'm going to introduce to you. And I'm introducing this because I just want feedback, really. This has been more of an experiment for me, but it's built on good technology. So if people see value in this, I would love to ship it. But from experience, I don't want to ship anything unless I know it's something that people want. So let me just take you through some reflections, and then I would love your feedback. So back in the day, we had a React with class components and function components, where class components were like stateful components and function components were like pure stateless components. The great thing about having classes as stateful components is that it match kind of like our thinking of what a stateful component is. Like it has some state, it has some methods to change that state. It had actual lifecycle methods of the component mounting, the component unmounting. It just felt very natural, like except that it was a class, right? And another thing is that it had issues with composition. Like you couldn't compose together multiple pieces of logic easily. And the React team also felt this, right? There was a reason the React team chose to not get rid of the class component, but bring React into a fully functional paradigm. And the choice they made was to bring the state management inside these before like stateless pure components into becoming stateful components. And they did this using hooks. And the good thing about using hooks or introducing hooks is that React can express all kinds of components with a single function. But more importantly, that isn't celebrated enough, I think, is the state composition. Like with hooks, you had a very flexible, predictable, type-friendly way of composing state management logic or application logic. Like you remember way back in the day, you had like mix-ins for create component. And as I just mentioned, classes doesn't compose well. So this is a really, really good paradigm for composing. And this is why Vue, for example, adopted hooks. They didn't adopt hooks because they wanted to bring them into a reconciler. They adopted it because of the composition, which is why they called it the composition API. But putting state management into this reconciler, like you have this counter, and this counter function is being called again and again when its dependencies expire and needs to update the UI. With that, you get things like stale closures, dependency arrays. You don't have any lifecycle hooks anymore because React went concurrent. And then we see that we're getting these hooks that has nothing to do with your app and your functionality, but things that's there for the library. Things like use callback or what's it called? Like use event or something, which is there to protect you from stale closures. Like we all know it isn't the best experience state management wise. But then you have solutions like Solid, which just doesn't do reconciliation. It's completely reactive. So that means that the component function only runs once, right? And the great thing about this is that it's still like just a function. It has all the state composition that hooks has, and it also has explicit life cycles. But on top of this, it's extremely performant, right? Because everything is like to the point reactive where it needs to be reactive. The challenge though is that reactive UIs are very magical. Like as an example here, we are returning one UI description. And how do you know what is reactive? So in this case, we have this count, but the code I've written here actually gets the current count value as we are returning this UI description. So literally this code returns a static 0. But because of Solid's compiler, it's going to do some magic under the hood and make that reactive. And then you have these special components like the each component and show component that isn't like super type friendly and has some magic to themselves. And you just can't use the language to express the dynamic nature of a UI, which you can do in a reconciler, like you can do in React. And if you accept this, like that's perfectly fine, but you have to accept the magic. And that's like anyone who's using a templating language accepts magic, right? And if it makes you productive, that's great. But I can't handle that, especially when I kind of see like unexpected runtime behavior, and I'm like looking at the code and like, well, this is not really what's running. So how could we like combine the amazing parts of reactive state management with amazing parts of reconciling UIs? And that's what this library is trying to do. Is that we still have a function, but that function runs once, because that's the setup phase. This is where you express all your state management, like creating state, setting up effects, or whatever you need. And then you return the function that will reconcile. So the function we see here is the function that will be called again and again whenever any of its state dependencies change. So that could be accessing a prop, it can be accessing a local state, it can be accessing something from the context, it doesn't matter. And again, we're keeping the single functional paradigm. We have the state composition in there, we have explicit lifecycle hooks, and it's also very performant, because if you have reactive UI, that's going to be the most performant. Solid is like kick-ass on performance. But this library is using Inferno, which is one of the fastest virtual DOM libraries out there. So it's insanely fast, like beyond what's necessary. But like all solutions, nothing is a silver bullet. The negative side to doing this is that you cannot destructure reactive objects. Just like in Solid, you can't destructure props, you can't destructure props here either. Or you can't destructure the state, you can't destructure the context, and so on. But that is an explicit rule of thumb that you have to accept if you're gonna embrace this, this library. And it's the only one. So the way you use this is that you have your components. If your component returns a function, it will be a stateful component. So you have your setup scope and you have your returned reconciliation scope. But you can still use components as normal. If you just return some UI description, that's going to be a stateless component, just like we had back in the day with React. The primitives you'll be using are like familiar, like it's context, you have state, you have computed, you have something called create view, which is basically a way to compose multiple reactive objects. As I mentioned, you can't destructure, so you have this view create view that allows you to compose multiple reactive objects. And then you have these async tools built in, like create async, create query, create mutation, and you have the different effects. Now the thing is that this library uses a single signature for reactive values, and that is what we call the reactive object. Props is a reactive object, state is a reactive object, computed is a reactive object, Create view is a reactive object. Create async is a reactive object. All of them are reactive objects, and they shouldn't be destructured, as I mentioned. But this creates a consistency in how you access reactive values. And a nice thing about this, a side effect of like not having this destructuring, is that you always have a reference to the value you're grabbing. So when you're looking at a value in your UI description, you see if that value comes from your state or your props or a computed and so on, which is just nice context to have. And then we have like plain old composition that Hooks gave us, which is just create your own function prefixed with create. Like create counter has some state, it has some computed, it has its increment function. You create it, return a view for it, and then you can choose to use that in a component, expose it on a context, pass it as a prop, like do whatever you want. And that's basically it. Like it seems like funny, like why returning a function, like it looks like just being clever. But this is really the point. It's like separating reactive state management from a reconciling UI and building a bridge between them so that you can enjoy writing state management and you can enjoy writing UI. So yeah, I would love your feedback on this. And yeah, let me know what you think and we'll see where this project goes. Thanks.